Good evening and welcome to Catholic Peekskill. I'm Father John Higgins, your host for this public access television show. Thanks for being with us. We're excited to talk about all things that relate to our Catholic faith and our beloved city of Peekskill here. And many of our parishioners at Assumption Church have come to know over the last few years a wonderful Franciscan priest. Father Thomas McNamara is a Franciscan friar of the Capuchin family, which adds the contemplative dimension to the Franciscan charism. And whether you've seen him maybe at our Spanish Mass, or he's helped many times with our English Masses, as well as on the opportunity for confessions, a beloved priest here at Catholic Peekskill. But his experience takes him back before his ordination in 2007, in which priestly time he's served in Honduras. He's worked at Our Lady of Sorrows Parish in Manhattan, and even worked on an extraordinary, unique kind of mission with day laborers on Long Island. But to tell us a little bit more about how he got there and how he got here, we welcome you, Father Thomas McNamara. Welcome.
Thank you.
So glad to have you here with us.
Great to be here tonight.
Did you always want to be a priest?
That's a great question. I think when I was in fourth grade, we had a movie one time, and I can remember seeing the movie clip where the priest candidate left his home, left his family, and entered a seminary, and I think that scared me. So I sort of put that out of my mind. No, I don't think that's something I'd want to do. And as I grew older through high school, I thought, no, I have too many things I want to do in my life. I just put it out of my mind. Although people would mention that, wouldn't you like to become a priest? And so honestly, I'd put that out of my mind. And it was only later in life where I would come back to the priesthood. My faith, I started out as one of 6 children. My mom, Italian heritage from Calabria. Endicott, Johnson's shoe factories. My grandfather worked up near Binghamton. My dad was a child of Irish immigrants, but 2 generations away. So up in central New York, a little town called Oriskany Falls, very small. There the Catholics were a minority. So we were a smaller group, and always sort of felt a little bit on the outside of the cultural, what was going on. Public schools throughout my schooling years. And my faith, I would sort of take it or leave it. I wouldn't have not gone to Mass, but it was only when I got to college that I experienced a renewal of my faith through the charismatic renewal and through the baptism of the Holy Spirit, and I began to take more seriously. Oh, you mean all those prayers actually go somewhere? You mean there's someone listening to all this? I was like, oh, that to me was remarkable, and that God is listening to me like you're listening to me here today. How could that be? I was like, wow, that's amazing. I met people who talked about Jesus, who was right in their lives, and that impressed me. I remember thinking, what you have, I want. And so it was that sense of being guided by the Spirit. I had put the priesthood out of my mind, though, but I felt that I was guided by the Spirit. And at that point, I was studying agriculture in the college, ornamental horticulture. I ended up working in landscape construction, and for many years, where I ended up, I had studied Spanish in high school and college, and I had a chance to use my Spanish in a very practical way.
In the landscape?
In landscape crews. And I actually got a chance to go home with a number of the laborers in the wintertime to the states of Jalisco and Ciudad Juarez across the border from El Paso, Texas. So I was fascinated by the culture. Something just attracted me to that, and that they were all very Catholic. How interesting. I through the charismatic renewal, and I played guitar, and so I was often involved in youth groups and in music ministries at the church, and so I was sort of fascinated by that. I kept on going. I had an opportunity to teach at a small 2-year college like Peekskill. It's called Morrisville, where I had previously studied ornamental horticulture. I taught there just for a stint. I got a master's in agriculture education, and I taught in the Binghamton area in a small high school called Oxford, Norwich, Oxford Green, along the Shenango Valley, just north of Binghamton. So I taught there several years. When the priesthood came back in force was one night, and I remember it was January of '95, January 7th to be exact.
Wow.
I happened to have a student teacher who was managing my classes marvelously. I had also just paid off my college loans, so I felt this sense of freedom that I hadn't felt. And I thought to myself, I don't have to do this. Thinking, why should I do this? And at one night, I was sitting there just quietly when I just felt the sense of the presence of God came over me. It was a remarkable thing. I had never sensed that before, but except through the baptism in the Spirit at the prayer group. But this sense of, it was like a question, but it was sort of like a statement, but it was still a question. You're going to be a priest. I just felt the sense of this sense of being a priest, like the words almost. And I remember calling my brother Anthony, who lives out in California. I said, Anthony, has this ever happened to you? And he's like, no. I'm like, what do you think I should do? Call the priest. I said, so I did. I called the priest. And I was active in the parish. I played music, worked with the youth. And so he said, pray about it. I said, okay. And the sense only grew stronger. And it was January, and I would be finishing out my school year. But I had a great desire also to go and work with a Catholic worker farm. I had previously taken groups of students down to Nazareth Farm in West Virginia, sort of a rural outreach center in the Appalachians, and one that was closer to home, about an hour north of Syracuse, St. Francis Farm in Lacona, New York. It was founded by a diocesan priest from the Syracuse Diocese, Ray McVeigh, of happy memory. And so I ended up taking a leave of absence for the teaching. I went up and worked at this Catholic worker farm, and I applied to the Diocese of Syracuse. Now, during this time, the Archdiocese of New York, the Cardinal Archbishop, John O'Connor, put an open letter out inviting anyone interested in the priesthood to come, and he would personally give a retreat. And I was like, this is great. I remember with my mom looking and said, what do you think? She says, yeah, go for it. He's going to pay for the I was like, great. So I wrote him a letter. He wrote me right back. Boom. So I went down and had a great time with him. And he said, oh, this is great. He says, well, great. He says, you go up, and the rector there, O'Brien, I think was his name. He said, yeah, just talk with the Syracuse Diocese. So I initiated the application process, psychological exams, and went through the whole interview. Came right down to the end. And the long and short of it was they didn't deem me a suitable candidate for the diocesan priesthood. And I think one thing that sank my boat was I said I felt it was like a voice inside of me. And he just nonplussed, just looked at me with a deadpan face and said, Tom, do you hear this voice often? And I knew I was sunk. I was trying to, I couldn't get myself out of that hole. And he said, but if you can talk the bishop into it, we'll approve you. And I'm like, talk the bishop out of it. Yeah, we had an extensive conversation on the reasons why I wouldn't be a suitable candidate. And I said, okay, thank you very much. I was crying. I was crushing because I had never, I had studied science. I'd never the thing was, I remember going to through the interview process, going to the chancellor's office, and he says, he's like, so tell me, Tom, you want to be a priest? And I see here on your transcript, agriculture? He's a priest? He's really? I said, well, I don't know. Jesus was a carpenter. Didn't go over well. I said, so what's chancellor do? He says, well, I'm sort of like the accountant for the diocese. I said, so you must have a considerable background in accounting. He said, well, actually, no. I said, oh. But as it was, I went back to the Catholic worker farm and just asking, Lord, is it because of 1 Peter, priests, prophets, and kings? Maybe you want me to be that kind of a priest. Maybe to take my baptismal vows more seriously. And so I immersed myself in the rural outreach center that was St. Francis Farm, helping the rural poor, raising crops. It was a great a lay community of was a retired priest, retired couples, and also college students and miscellaneous folks such as myself who would volunteer. And I volunteered for a year when I met a woman from Holy Name of Mary Parish in Croton on Hudson.
Right nearby.
Right nearby. And she was bringing a group of youth who would often we had groups of youth throughout the year that worked with us for a week at a time and shared in our prayer and our outreach. And she said, you remind me of this groups of friars and priests. They're called Capuchins. You ought to give them a call. She gives me this number. I made the phone call, and there was a friar on the other end, honestly, with the most horrible Bronx accent. You just got to come down here. And I was like, oh. But I said, Lord, if you're calling me to the priesthood, I've got to go. I've got to go to the horizon. I've got to go see what's over there. I've got to go know. I got to know if this is what you're calling to ordained priesthood. I've got to check it out. So I went down. It was in Garrison, New York, St. Francis Friary. And I went there. It was great. There was an old friar with a staff and a great long beard. Ha, ha. Looked like the old crazy uncle that everyone has. I said, this is great. People playing volleyball and eating pizza. And I was like, this is a great place. And I sat down in that chapel of the Holy Family. And I just felt, it came together. I'm like, where am I? I felt so totally at home. And we had a little behavioral assessment at the end of the day. And he says, he said, we just have to, I said, fine. So we went to the office. I said, before we go any further, I got to say something. I kind of like heard a voice. It was sort of like the Lord, I felt like the Lord calling me to be a priest. He says, you heard a voice? Tom, did you really hear a voice? He says, welcome to the club. And I just started laughing. And he just started talking about something else. I'm like, wait a minute. So this is not, he's like, look at the Bible. The Lord always talks to his people. Next. And he just went on this. I was like, oh my goodness. And I knew I'd found a home. So by joining the Friars, it's funny. In that time, my mom had died, but my dad was sick. And actually he was dying. And I just said, I cannot join now. And the postulancy house was at St. Michael in East New York. Okay. At that point in time, it was probably one of the most violent precincts in New York, and shootings, and it was a difficult situation. And I said, you know what, this country boy can't take this stress. I said, I need at least a year when no one dies. So I took a year and entered the Friars in August of 2000. Okay. Entered the House of Postulancy. And as a friar, you begin, after the candidacy year, I'd come down for weekends, or once every 2 months or so. But then that first full probationary year is called postulancy. One is a postulant. You engage in the life of prayer with the brothers, a life, common life, fraternal life, and then go out on an apostolate. And that year is followed by a novitiate year, which for me occurred in Mount Calvary, Wisconsin. I don't know if you ever heard of the Poor Boys Seminary, right there in the mount of Mount Calvary. Beautiful place, dairy country. And finished my novitiate in 2000. In August, took my first vows at Sacred Heart in Yonkers, on the hill in Yonkers. And then I entered the House of Studies, San Lorenzo de Brindisi, up in Jamaica Plain, Boston area, Massachusetts. So I studied there for 5 years. And during that time, that gave me an opportunity to do a little work as an intern, as a chaplain in a prison. I also had a chance to visit Central America. And I was smitten. I just couldn't believe. I said, I want to live here. And like, well, you have to finish your studies. You have to get ordained before you could even think about that. I said, I want to live here. I said, at some point in my life. And so I completed my studies, was ordained in 2007. I'm going on 10 years. This September 8th, the birthday of the Blessed Mother. So, so I completed my studies in May of 2007. Returned as a deacon, and what the friars did for me, they said, Tom, we know you love the Spanish language and the culture. We'd like to open up some sort of ministry with the day laborers, because there are millions nationwide, and there's just a great need on Long Island. And so I ended up moving into the fraternity at St. Joseph the Worker in East Patchogue. It's in Suffolk County, Long Island. So I lived in that parish, lived in that fraternity, and then I served a day laborer migrant ministry working through Catholic Charities. And so we operated a trailer across the road from the Home Depot in Freeport. Okay. And so offered solace to the guys out in the streets, because there were literally dozens and dozens there could be 50, 70, 80 guys standing out there in all weather. So talking with them, praying with them. I had a chance to offer sacraments. I celebrated a few masses and funerals because some of the fellows died. I mean, just so much went on during that time, and it was a beautiful time of ministry for me as a new priest and as a friar. Was really it was a wonderful opportunity. And it's interesting, fellows from Central America, they knew right away, Fray, they come right up to me, Fray, ¿cómo se llama? What's your name? And it was wonderful. I just loved it. I was immediately invited into their homes, and they were just so welcoming. I couldn't believe it, because they knew the friars. Because, as you know, the missionaries that came with Spain were Franciscan. So starting from New Spain, which is Mexico, and founding the state of California, El Camino Real was through all Franciscan friars. So they were very familiar with the Franciscan charism. So I ended up working there a couple of years when the friars asked me, would you consider moving to the Lower East Side of Manhattan at Our Lady of Sorrows? And I, being this country boy, I'm like, are you kidding me? Manhattan? Me? It's like, there must be someone better. They're like, no, you would be just the right. I said, okay. So I gave it a try. It was rough. The first year was really tough for me. I had difficulty just going outside. I just couldn't relate to. It was overload. It's just in the air. The air vibrates there with smells and sounds and people and cultures and questions and problems and violence, and it was just. But after a year, I was able to reach out. I was there 4 years. Beautiful parish down on the Lower East Side, Our Lady of Sorrows. English speaking, the predominant group though are Dominicans from the Dominican Republic and Puerto Ricans. The grandparents are Puerto Ricans, and the younger working class are Dominicans. So I was there for 4 years. When I finally had the opportunity to go to Central America, I went down to Central America, and I just loved it. Just being in a rural parish where we had 110 villages that we visited.
Among how many priests was that?
4, and so there were 5 larger temples, colonial, built by the Spaniard, large, to seat anywhere from 400 to 500 to 1,000. So big places. So among those 5 centers, and then other centers and village, 110. So constantly sacraments, constantly funerals, weddings, confessions, visitations, youth groups. So many youth groups if I could visit one, I whenever I could, try to squeeze it in, because it's a very young culture, growing. Sure. Excitement. I love the rope bridges, the 4-wheel drive, the mountain climbing. It was amazing just to get to these outlying areas. Were amazing. The furthest mission was 2 hours driving and climbing. It was amazing. It was just so.
So you would go to these missions. I mean, it couldn't be every week. It'd be once every 2 months in some cases.
Correct. So some were once every month, some were once every 2 months, some were once every 6 months, some were once a year for their patronal feast. because during the rainy season, which is May to November, some places are just impassable. So you had to sort of plan your trips accordingly. And that's why the Catholic Church has had such a difficult time holding on, because the Protestants have grown in great numbers because we're unable to reach. There's such a need for missionaries out there, because people would see a priest maybe once, twice, 3 times a year, and you did everything you could, everything from oh Padre, I wish I could see, and I had my glasses from the pharmacy. She said, I haven't been able to read in years. I said, here, try these. She said, ay, Dios mío. She could read again. I'm like, keep them. Because you're out there. There's no medical care. I mean, these people are, it's really, but you felt like you were right at the heartbeat, the pulse of the faith, of the church, of life. And it was such excitement. And then, of course, we take these 3 vows. One day that phone call came. Here I am in heaven. And it's like, Brother Lake, well, hi, Brother Tom, how are you? I'm like, very well. He's telling me, how's your ministry going? Thinking, why is he calling me? Why is he calling me? This is not a social call. I had an idea. He's probably calling me. We'd like you to consider, would you consider working at our Capuchin Youth and Family Ministries in the Hudson River Valley? It's in a beautiful place called Garrison, New York. I'm familiar with the place. Would you consider? I said, well, there must be someone better. And I said, look, high school was tough for me. Once was enough. I said, look, I think I'm going to be like a deer in the headlights. I said, I don't know. It was rough. I got bullied. I had a hard time in high school. I said, I don't know. Just think about it. I said, okay, I'll think about it. And so I'm like, poverty, chastity, obedience.
Poverty, chastity, and I'll think about it.
I was like, how can you say no? They would have accepted a no.
Yeah.
But how can I say no and say I'm really taking this vow seriously? So next time he called, I said, yes, I'll go. So I came. And
that was in what year? That
would have been August of 2015. And I got to go on the Capuchin Appalachian Mission with them. That was the tail end of their year, ministry year. Actually, it was the end of July in 2015. It was absolutely overwhelming, the culture and the roads and the water and the devices, and I was overwhelmed. I was inundated. So the first 6 months, I was physically present, but not so emotionally present.
Yeah.
And I had an opportunity, though, by meeting a priest by the name of Francisco Tejada. I said, if you ever hear of a parish that needs a little help and has a Spanish-speaking, I'd love to come. He introduced me to Father Vincent, and I had a chance to celebrate Mass. And honestly, serving here in Peekskill at Assumption Parish was a lifesaver for me, because I could not understand everything that was going on around me, but I could understand the parish and the people and the Mass and confession. That helped me to ease back into this culture here in North America, United States. So it was a great, for me, it was a great opportunity to ease myself into this ministry at Capuchin Youth. I mean, it's a wonderful, we say make faith your own. So we help youth to make faith their own and help them to meet other youth throughout the Hudson Valley, and that they have an experience of the youth of the faith come alive. So, but working here has helped me a lot through Peekskill, through Assumption Parish.
We were the ones that feel most blessed to have you, and you're a very sought after confessor, and when many people at our church love to take advantage of that sacrament, and love especially to take advantage of whenever you're here with us to confess. And I could tell our audience that it wasn't when we connected there in 2015, when you just come back.
October, I think.
October 2015. It wasn't the first time we met, because when you went on that retreat with Cardinal O'Connor back in 1995, I was there.
It's amazing.
And I'm sure I don't remember the details, but I remember I was hosting that retreat. And
wow, so you were one of the seminarians at the time?
I was, yeah.
That's
so
amazing.
I'm glad it circles back around. And I want to tell our studio audience how grateful they are that they've joined us for this episode of Catholic Peekskill. You know, Assumption Church is a very diverse parish, and those who know and love Catholic Peekskill have seen some of the many blessings that have come here. You know, if you do come to visit us at the church, we'd love you to know that we have confessions on Saturday afternoon from 4 to 5, and every now and again we'll get Father Thomas McNamara to help us. We have 5 p.m. Mass on Saturday afternoon, 7 p.m. In Spanish on Saturday night, and then our Sunday Mass schedule is at 8 a.m., 10 a.m., 12 noon, and then we have our Spanish Mass at 7:15 p.m. And I hope you'll take a visit us, our Catholic Peekskill Facebook page, our Assumption Peekskill website, and whatever you do, why don't you tap us on the shoulder and say that you've seen us at Catholic Peekskill. Father Tom, before you give us the final blessing, any last things you'd like to share with our studio audience that has struck you about your priestly ministry as something that you like to do most of all?
You know, it's funny because I think I could never have imagined this, but through the priesthood, God has allowed me to integrate my gifts in a way that I could never have imagined. In the other works, as much as I loved and enjoyed them, the priesthood and religious life has enabled me to integrate them in a way that I feel most fulfilled. I mean, I feel like I'm really alive.
Of course, why don't you give our studio audience a
Sure.
final blessing?
Yeah, it's such a blessing it is to be here this night. I think of the blessing that Father Francis gave Brother Leo as he said, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord bless you, Brother Leo, and grant you peace, now and always, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you for joining us for Catholic Peekskill. God bless you and good night.
Hosanna in excelsis,